Study after study tells us that a Black teacher in the life of a Black student, and any student for that matter, is a good thing, but we have too few of them. We're going to talk about why and what we can do about it right now.
This is Freedom Friday, and you're still not free.
Good morning, fam. Welcome to another week of Freedom Friday. It is Friday, and you are still not free, but hopefully you will be freer after an hour with Sharif El Mekki and me. This is what we're talking about today. Nationwide, there are more than 15% of students in public schools are Black, while only 7% of all teachers are also Black. In major cities, this disparity is greater, especially for Black males. In Philadelphia public schools, more than 25% of all students are Black boys and young men, while only 4% of teachers are. The problem is getting worse, not getting better. In Pennsylvania, for instance, and we're talking a lot about Philly because Sharif, who is with us this morning, as always with Freedom Friday, is in Philly, but this is a national problem. But Philly,
West Philly, but good.
Okay, West Philly. You want to be very clear about where our people are from. Black enrollment in Philly educator programs has decreased by 60% since 1996. I once did a statistic in the show that we have right now that talked about how prior to Brown versus Board, the majority of Black students every day were in the care of a Black veteran educator. After 1954, after Brown versus Board, we lost, just it devastated the Black teacher pool, and we never recovered. We never got those teachers back again. We turned our students over wholesale to other people, into other schools, other districts, other school boards that didn't have their best interest in mind. And when they did have their best interest in mind, they weren't equally ready for the task as those Black educators were that we lost prior to Brown. In some places, since I'm in Minnesota, I'll tell you about Minneapolis. 1977, Minneapolis had 8% Black teachers. And this is before, Minnesota became a lot more brown. Minneapolis for sure became a lot more brown since then. And in 77, they had 8% Black teachers. Today, they have less than 4%. So imagine going from 1977 to now and having the problem get worse, even as over time. In 1977, Minneapolis Public Schools was a very white school district. It was majority white. It was so white that it was whiter than white. And then it became off-white, and then it became cream color and eggshell color or whatever. Today, the majority of students in Minneapolis Public Schools are of color. Probably about 70% of the kids are of color. The biggest plurality of those students are Black students, and yet we have fewer Black teachers than we did in 1977. We're going to talk today, number one, about why is this a problem, and two, how to solve it. Sharif, as always, we talk about everybody else's work and issues on Freedom Friday. Oftentimes, we forget that you're running a whole center, the Center for Black Educator Development, that is seeking to address this problem. So I really wanted to dig in on this this week because we gloss over it. And we talk about your work sometimes, and we talk about the problem, but let's dedicate a full hour to talking about it.
I appreciate it. I appreciate it. I mean, and I think the complexity of the issue, the impact of Black teachers, I mean, it is worth our absolute best, sincerest effort. And it is really an all hands on deck. I even get nervous if it's only superintendents or educators talking about it, because it's really should be, a whole scope, ecosystem of folks speaking about it, because it wasn't superintendents alone. Schools played their part, obviously, with their anti-Blackness and jettisoning, Black teachers out or not hiring them because they didn't do, They don't sound the way that they wanted to, or they were too connected to communities. But they weren't alone. There were plenty of policymakers, politicians, and philanthropists, and others who were also complicit or gleefully active in dismantling the Black teacher pipeline.
Mm-hmm. So the center is really focused on rebuilding the pipeline of
Yeah.
Black teachers. That
Mhm.
feels like a big task, overwhelming task. And I wonder how you think you're going to win because
Yeah.
it seems to be such a big problem with such a small number of people coming down the pipeline.
hmm Oh, it's a huge problem, I think. But you know what? That's what gives me fuel, and we talk about like don't blink. This is one of the odds where you're like, all right, don't blink, because there's the forces against the idea of rebuilding a Black teacher pipeline are nothing to underestimate at all. But I think it also gives me hope, and the way to win is that pamoja tutashinda. Like you can only win something like this in community with others. Like it is impossible
Mhm.
to think that the center can help a city, let alone a country, reach parity. But we can say, like, hey, who are all the other folks in the orbits who are doing this work, who we can align with, who we can partner with? You always often talk about not boiling the ocean. So, what can we focus on very explicitly? But then, who's right next to us, focusing on something very, similar or adjacent that links it? A perfect example is the idea of teacher salaries, right? Like we're not we can't necessarily raise salary. That's not within our locus of control. But there's a whole organization that is working on advocating for that, pushing for that, in addition to the grassroots folks, right? Like there's a teacher salary project who their full focus is on making sure teacher salaries are elevated, right? Especially when we know we're trying to recruit Black teachers, and we know that many of them are first gen college goers. That means their family will receive bills that they've never experienced before,
Hmm.
right? You're already in a pattern, the utilities and this and that, and that for a couple of generations. And then here's, you have a kid or a grandkid now going to college. So now you're introduced to a whole nother set of expenditures, right? And so afterward, you may say, like, hey, you know what? Like, what's that starting salary? Like, hey, you have to contribute, understanding in Black communities how often, even if you have some means, odds are you're probably helping someone else in your family and community, like monthly, like
Mhm.
direct line to support, right? Like, so all these things play into something like a salary and loans and debts.
Mhm.
But we know we'll win, with in collaboration and in community with other people, including our youth,
Mhm.
including our
So
youth.
let's think of it as a math problem. Do
hmm
we have a number nationally of how many teachers we think would be the goal? Like, what's the big number of Black teachers that we would want?
Yeah.
Yeah. What's the
Yeah.
number?
Hold, brace yourself.
Yeah.
So we're part of a collaboration called
Mhm.
the 1 Million Teachers of Color campaign.
Mhm. Mhm.
1 million teachers of color. Like that's an astounding
Mhm.
number.
Mhm.
And the Black kind of section of that, the number of Black teachers to reach parity, you're talking about almost 300,000
Mhm. Mhm. Doesn't
more
sound that
Black
bad. I
teachers.
mean, so in total, there's probably about 3, 4 million teachers nationally right now.
Yeah.
So we would need an additional million teachers of color overall, and of that, a third of that would need to be Black. So 300,000 teachers.
Give or
Okay.
take. Yeah. Yeah.
All right. That's a big number. So
Huge
if
number.
that starts our math problem, this is where I'm going with like the calculating of the problem.
hmm
So um, there's only a certain number of Black people that graduate from college, period. And you have to go to college to be a teacher. So let's start there.
hmm
Of those Black people that go to college, only a certain number of them are going to enter into the School of Education or go into education.
And
And
keep
it's,
in mind, most ed prep programs outside of
yeah,
HBCUs, they're less diverse. They got less Black people in the ed prep programs than they have in the overall general student body. Many of them. It's a
wow.
it's a, it's a shame of ed prep programs. They don't like to talk
So
about it.
Yeah, very white ed program. So first of all, when you get your annual group of Black high school graduates, only a certain number of those are going to enter college,
Mhm.
and I think that's 25% or so. Only 15% are going to come out the other end with a degree, so that makes a smaller number of people. The majority of those are going to be women and not going to be Black males. So that whittles the number down even further if we're trying to get more Black men into teaching, for one. The number of them that are high performing that will be lured into other majors and into other opportunities is high. So that whittles the number down even further. The ones who do still, after all of that, pursue College of Ed, as you said, are in very white College of Ed schools. And some of them are going to have attrition, possibly because they're getting on those programs and they're seeing this ain't for me or whatnot. And then the ones who do get out to become teachers, the number of them that are going to pass praxis on the first try is, unfortunately whittles down another group, and it costs money to do that multiple times. So, so you have some people that are going to self-select out at that gate. I'm just thinking of all these gates, right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So we come to another gate. After you do all of that, you're left with probably more women than men still, Black women than men.
Oh, yeah.
And then those Black men go into schools, and we've talked about this on other shows, where oftentimes they are miscast in the role, right? They're seen as the disciplinarian or the not the fully authoritative person, somebody else's whatever. And in the first 5 years, we have more attrition because we know that you probably would know better than I do what the number is, but we do know that like within the first 5 years, all teachers have attrition. Like,
Oh, yeah.
number that stay. Now we're left with very few people who are Black, and definitely Black and male. So if your number is 300,000, it seems like you should have to shoot for like 2 million
to get the
to get the number that you need. It seems like, and that becomes more daunting, I should say. That becomes more daunting when you think about the number of our students that are having a bad experience in the traditional public schools.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, and what you talk about, we call it the leaky pipeline, like, so all these holes that, people are like falling out. Right. And I think this is why, it is short-sighted, so often policymakers, a lot of people, just human nature. Sometimes, unfortunately, they'll take a complex problem and they want a simple solution. And that is a recipe for failure. If we just say, approach it in not a comprehensive way, and just like, oh, we just need more Black teachers, so let's just do X, and we're not paying any attention to high school, just K-12 experience of a Black student, and why would they want to come back. I quote Chris Hemden often at one of the Black Male Educator convenings. He said recruiting Black people to, young Black people to the classroom, to schools, is like recruiting them back to the scene of a crime committed against themselves, right? And so that's one thing, recognizing, the uniquely oppressive experience that so many Black children experience in a place that's supposed to be called safe, and a place of learning and place of community, and all of that, all the jargon that's attached to schools and systems and education. We have to look at educator prep programs, and what does that mean? Are people actually being prepared? Are they being taken care of? Are they coming out saying like, oh, I am ready to serve? Do they learn in these educator prep programs? Do they learn how to work in communities, or do they learn how to work in systems? And it's a vast difference between the two. And then once you get there, what type of environment? If Dr. King was talking about integration as, I'm afraid I'm integrating my people into a burning house, how many of us are trying to integrate Black people into a burning schoolhouse? So all of these things that you laid out very clearly is problematic. And this is why it has to be a very comprehensive, deliberate approach to addressing it, addressing the holes in the pipeline. Right. Ingersoll talks about, sometimes we look at recruiting and there's a hole in the bottom of the bucket, and we just think like, oh, pouring water. At some point, it looks like the bucket is full just because of the amount of water that's going out. But you didn't fix the hole, right? And so all of it is going to leak out. So we have people who are recruiting Black teachers through the front door, and they are leaving out the back door. Sometimes just because of the ecosystem that is pervasively racist. It's the same that they experienced as a student. Now they're experiencing the racial aggressions from colleagues and supervisors. And on top of that, on top of being triggered from their childhood memories as a student and their current state of experiences, but then they're also trying to protect students who look like them from the same racial aggressions. So like all that's a three-pronged thing that addresses that supports high attrition, like fuels high attrition. And so that's why it has to be a comprehensive approach. You can't recruit without thinking about retention plans. And what does a retention plan look like in a space that's 80% white when you're trying to recruit more Black people into it? So all of these things are factors. Yet there's hope. There are things that we can double and triple down on. There are things that we can do, but we can't separate educational justice from racial justice. And I think often that's too often done. People are like, oh yeah, education justice, and this is a civil rights, and they are mute, oblivious at best, and just flippant at worst about racial justice is core and central to achieving educational justice. You're muted.
I was saying that's really a big point that we should stop and just put a stake in the ground on. The educational advocacy kind of movement that we trade in and that we participate in does have a certain segment of people who believe that racial justice and social justice is a completely separate concept and that the issues are different. And they're eager to participate in an education movement if it means that we stick to things that they agree with, like literacy, math and reading, literacy and assessment, testing, even to some degree, some form of teacher prep, all of that. They get a little bit spongy when it comes to answering questions like, well, why does a Black teacher make a difference in the life of Black children if everything is unracial? If we're in a post-racial situation, like I hear people say oftentimes, research tells us that a Black teacher has a huge impact on Black students. Oh, and by the way, and white students too. I rarely hear people say, okay, but can we unpack that? Why? Like, why is that?
Yeah.
Why?
Yeah.
Like, if the world is so post-racial, why would a Black teacher?
It shouldn't be up to. And Dr. Constance Lindsay, who we had on the 8 Black Hands, we should bring her back, on Freedom Friday one day to go deeper in it, right? Black women out of UNC and her colleagues did that research long. We've always known short term, right? Short term, same race teacher, Black student with a Black teacher, less likely to be suspended, expelled, or even referred for discipline. Less likely to to have their every behavior analyzed as pathological. More likely to have a rigorous course, and not just course like AP course, or also like opportunities, right? So many opportunities flow through schools across the principal's desk, teacher desk. Where do those opportunities go, right? Who gets them? All of those kind of things, that social capital building. More likely to see a curriculum that doesn't tell them that they are just stowaways to, civilization, that they are actually contributors and participants, right? All of these things, and we knew that short term. So that year, this is the impact of that teacher on that kid. And yes, we all know that there are some good, some bad, blah, 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 all of that. And pound for pound, this is what happens. Average to average, this is what happened. But when Constance Lindsay, Dr. Lindsay did this, when her and her colleagues did this research, and they looked at hundreds of thousands of Black students and across multiple states to see, like, okay, what about long term? Up to, and then we're talking about like those Black boys, for example, that we talked about earlier, up to 39% less likely to drop out of school. Which ed reform, component has numbers like that, and up to 29% more likely to go to college. That's one teacher, let alone 2, 3, or 4, right? One. Short term, long term, and it's nothing new, right? Because Caroline LeCount was talking about this, Black educators for Black students in the 1800s. Dr. King talked about not sending the children to people who are, he was like, yeah, integration. I'm talking about public spaces that we pay our taxes, parks and buses and
Yeah.
things like that.
Yeah.
Don't send your children to people who don't look at them as full human beings. So when we talk about the impact, some people just say, oh, it's just because a model, because the Black child, they see a Black person, they're like, oh, that could be me. No. Yes, that's a part of it. I don't want to ignore that. Like, that's an absolutely critical part. Marion Wright Edelman used to say, it's harder to be what you can't see. So yes, and there's also some things around, like Dr. Lassane talks about that Black teaching tradition, the cultural expectations, the high expectation to say like, oh no, you can do it. A communal attachment, like, look, I'm going to be successful if you're successful, and you're going to be successful if I'm successful. And if I look at you as part of my community, as opposed to, I'm here for a job. Like, you ain't really part of my community. I actually live over there. Like, I have no connection to this space. My only interaction with Black people is right now with you as a child. That's my only interaction with Black people altogether.
Yeah. I'm going to be petty.
Be petty.
This is I'm going to be petty Tendergrass right now. So Kate Walsh, who is somebody that I respect,
recently retired
from the National Council of Teacher Equality. Respect her for the work that she has done on putting such a big highlight on teacher equality as a thing in general. But Kate and I have very different racial opinions about race, different ideas about race and social justice. And I didn't read it, but I saw Robert Pondiscio tweeting about her yesterday because he wrote a piece with her, like an exit interview. And the tone of it was, before we got into all of this worrying about the identity of the teacher and all of this social justice stuff, we used to focus on the things that matter and say the brave things, which is teaching kids how to read and having quality and blah, 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 has nothing to do with all that stuff, right? So here's Robert, who wrote a book about teaching, talking about a white woman who ran an organization that focused intently on teacher quality. And both of them are deeply disrespectful of the idea that social justice and racial justice is a part of the educational equation, and that they don't hold all the cards and all the answers. And this is where I'm really going to be petty, which is Robert is now saying all these equity people with their equity talk. Where were they when the science of reading stuff was coming up? Because reading is really what's equity. So first of all, the equity people, the so-called equity people, it's a stupid mythology that folks haven't concentrated every bit as much as he or anybody else has on whether or not Black kids can read. For God's sake, my hashtag is the revolution will be literate. By the way, if you want to buy a t-shirt, go to citizenstewart.com and get you the revolution will be literate t-shirt, and it will go to the 8 Black Hands Literary Society, by the way, the funds and proceeds. Anyways, but here's the petty part. So Robert taught at a school where he, and this isn't to pick on him, but it's only to point out the difference between Black and white ed advocacy, especially when it comes to social justice. He has said for years, and I'm not saying anything he hasn't said, it's on the record, he believes that social justice people came into the ed reform movement and ruined it because they brought all those other issues in. Robert taught at a school that when he left in New York, the Black kids started 3 different social media channels and a whole ass campaign talking about how it was like slavery going to that school and how they were treated by him and the other white personnel and the white founder of that charter school. So you can't be a national expert on education of children of color and Black children when you are missing the fact that the Black children in your school are literally feeling as though you're treating them like they are in prison or slaves. So much so to where they start a whole campaign that gets national attention, Instagram feed, a Twitter feed, and a Facebook feed with them having videos expressing how oppressive the environment was that you thought was so great. because
Oh yeah.
you were pushing academic, blah, 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 this and that, the other. Oh, and by the way, if I really want to get totally petty, then the founder of your school actually gets indicted and is going to jail for stealing money from the school and from those very children. So let's not go there. Let's not do this.
But it was heavenly bliss, according to Robert.
It was so paternalistic. My kids were learning. I was teaching them real civics and the real story. And we didn't do any of this social justice-y 16, 19, blah, blah, blah. It was about quality. And, he wrote a whole piece like, I don't believe in social justice. Can I still be a teacher? And I wrote a piece back saying, no, you can't teach mine. Like, you can be a teacher. You can teach somebody's kids, but you can't teach my kids that dumb shit. Thus, the power of having Black teachers where we don't even have, this isn't even a discussion.
Yeah.
Like I feel so dumb even having to have this conversation.
It's nuts, right? And how many like Robert are leading classrooms, leading schools, totally oblivious to actually who they're teaching. They can't see who they're teaching. They can't see who's in the classroom. They can't make the connection between social justice and education. And they literally think as long as they stand up and lecture and spew information and opinions and give what they call classic, which is just about always white and Eurocentric or white American, they're so like just disconnected from the realities of the majority of the student population, what education actually means. And even just to be, and he calls himself a historian or something, so that, to me, it's always funny when he thinks that Black people who are advocating for this are Johnny come latelys, which means that he has not done any serious research, even just a surface level of reading and comprehending the actual history of Blacks in education. He needs to pick up James Anderson's book. He needs to pick up Jarvis Gibbons' books. He needs to pick up, several hours of Dr. Greg Carr's YouTube channel. But that's the part that, so it goes beyond just modeling. It is when Robert retires, who's replacing him to make sure that we are moving closer to a path towards justice, where students will actually be educated. And I think it's almost like sinister in a lot of different ways, for people, to have that type of constricted mindset about the humanity of other people, other people's children. And again, people that you have no deep, real connections with, no deep seated love or loyalty to. Your only relationship with this community is within a school and with children. Nothing else about the Black culture, Black community, Black people do you have any kind of affinity towards. And it shows. It doesn't just show in your writing. I am absolutely sure, because I can imagine how he taught, because I've seen it before. I've seen that type of mindset leading classrooms, schools, and systems. And he can't tell me shit about Black people and teaching them folks how to read, because I remember what the 70s were when Black folks were teaching children how to read, right? And I've sang the phonetic alphabet on the show before, like how we learned the alphabet. We didn't learn the version that he's very familiar with, and most Americans are familiar with. And their deep connection between literacy and liberation and understanding that. Right. And so it's absolutely, I agree with you. It's almost silly, but yet we have to, right? We have to engage and fire back, because if not, that's what the narrative will just remain. The white dominance, white supremacy dominant narrative about Blacks in education and the relationship between teaching and learning and us.
I mean, if we don't, not all of us have to do the same job.
Yeah, everybody's not going to do hand-to-hand combat. We all got to roll.
I will go back and forth with them because I'm not running a school right now. I'm not currently in a classroom. I'm not planning out my scope and sequence for the week, for the year, or for whatever. Excuse me. But somebody does need to address these things that develop a narrative.
Yep.
Right. And the narrative that's developing on their side right now is that all this social justice stuff and racial justice stuff should be decoupled from strong teaching. And I think they do that because they want a place in teaching that doesn't require them to have to do that other work.
Exactly. Exactly. Right. Like I don't want to think about my bias. I just want to teach. Then how are you teaching? How do you teach if you have ingested your racial biases in such a way that they manifest? Because to think that it doesn't manifest itself in how you lesson plan, how you grade, how you build community and relationships, how you question students, right? Like even the idea of like, who am I questioning? Am I pressing the right way? Am I holding us collectively accountable? Am I going back to that student? Or do I have such low expectations that if they give the wrong answer, I'm not even going to push and challenge them? I'm not going to say, hey, call on a friend and then I want you to synthesize what they said and marry it with your answer and then give me another answer, right? All of these things inform how I teach. And so just to be dismissive of it is not only like callous, it's ignorant. It's downright ignorant to say and arrogant, right? Like just to claim like I don't have to do any work. The mindset, which is the most important, mindsets matter most. And so if you say like I ain't got to worry about none of that, I just want to teach this content, you might as well. I think you should leave the profession. I think you should leave the profession, make space.
Well, he did.
Yeah, he did.
In his case, he did, and he wrote a book about it.
Likely not soon enough.
No, not soon enough, because the kids that he taught formed whole social media streams about how poorly they were treated as Black children and how they felt it was a plantation. But then, you graduate from teaching and you get to live on that for the rest of your life. I wrote a book now.
Oh yeah.
And I'm an expert online, and I can tell you that. And, oh, by the way, I mean, his feed is full of other white teachers that are anti-woke, anti-social justice, anti-racial justice or whatnot. And then I contrast that with so yesterday we did a Twitter chat with a teacher in Union City, New Jersey, who teaches in a school district that actually has gotten, it's a traditional public school district that actually has gotten results with children of color and with Black children. His class, most of his students are African-American. His name is Nicholas Ferroni, and he's nationally known on influencer on the internets. But the thing with him is that he is like humble about like, I want to learn more about. I have most of these students of color. I'm trying to learn more about my role in teaching them. I'm trying to learn more about so he's not like I'm at the finish line, I have the answers. So if you contrast that, I mean, you have one who taught for a short amount of time and mostly in a school where the Black children have told the whole world that they felt like it was a plantation and it was oppressive and terrible, who then wrote a book and became a Twitter expert, versus one who's still in the classroom and has been in the classroom for a long time, teaching African-American children every day, who is still asking questions about what is my role? Am I doing this the right way? Like approaching the job with humility, right?
And understanding of like what the role of cultural proficiency, like understanding, not erasing kids, right? Like, being is because colorblindness is worse because when you realize that when you are colorblind, that means the default is whiteness, right? And that's what totally misses, Robert's line of thinking. Like you want to be everything just neutral. You can't build neutrality on racist beginnings because that means it's already uneven. Like it just doesn't, it's illogical to even consider something so stupid. So the idea that Nicholas, who I had the chance to meet in Indianapolis at the college football playoffs, the idea is like, okay, culture proficiency, and it is a continuum, right? Because I could be culturally proficient towards a child and be culturally destructive to another child in the same classroom. Right? I could be culturally proficient and then culturally blind from period to period, day to day, hour to hour. And so understanding that and constantly making sure that that is part of the praxis of an educator, right? Like, how do you be humble and courageous? And the humility is, I'm here to serve you and I'm here to get better. The courage is to tell yourself the truth, because we know to ourselves is the first person that we lie to. It's ourselves. Oh, I'm doing fine. I need to. No, I wonder and how we develop our teachers, even as high school students, these apprentices. we say, we want you to ask your students how they're experiencing your leadership,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
Don't just assume and just like, oh, I'm this and I'm that. No, how are they experiencing your leadership? How are families experiencing your partnership? Right. And so that is just gives you a little bit of a window if you're incorporating that into it. If you're teaching and you've gone all month and not even mentioned any contributions of black and brown people in this space. Like I've known music teachers that have taught white European teachers all year long, white European musicians all year long to black and brown students all year. And they think that's normal. That ain't normal. That's about as crazy as you can get, But they think like, no, this is just good teaching. No, it's the worst teaching. It's shit.
Hmm. You know, and I want to move on to some of the sender's work, but before we do, I want to this point that you just made, I want to double click on
Mm,
with a personal story, like in my own life. My son, who's in high school, um, this year, you've heard me say this, Sharif.
mhm.
They did Of Mice and Men. They read Of Mice and Men, Anthem by Ayn Rand. Um, um, oh, what's oh, Night. Yeah, Night, which was about the Holocaust. And then they came to at the end of the year, they came to there was one other book in there too that I'm missing that was like an old one. It was like, like Gatsby-esque or something. I can't remember. It was
Mhm.
like along those
Mhm.
lines. But then they came to at the end of the year, they're doing To Kill a Mockingbird and Dear Martin back to back. And the teacher sent an email saying, now I know these are going to be controversial. I think we're going to have the kids engage in both books, and it was something like my son told me they're having a contest. They're going to eliminate one, and they're going to have the kids debate like why one of those should be eliminated, one of those two books. And I'm like, okay, so all year long you didn't debate whether or not any of these other white books should be anything other than just read and done. I didn't get an email saying, hey, we're about to read Ayn Rand's Anthem. Now, I know this might be a little controversial because she's a godless atheist from Russia who thinks that selfishness is the highest principle of humanity, right? Like, she's a very polarizing figure. We didn't get any of that. We
Mhm.
didn't get that until we get an email in the inbox that says we're going to be covering finally a black topic at the end of the year, by the way.
Mhm.
And it's in the context of whether or not we're going to have the kids better debate whether or not we should keep that book in the cycle.
Yeah, and one of it is about like enslavement, right? Like, and so like when you are spoken about, like this is the lens
Right.
that we're going to use, and I think this is, as I get older, and I've always appreciated and loved, and I talk about them incessantly because I think them, and they weren't alone. There were so many independent black schools, and there's so many black teachers that incorporate independent black thought
Mm-hmm.
into their teaching now in whatever type of school that they're working in, right? But for me to be a third and fourth grader, to understand when my teacher, and I didn't understand it fully at the time, but they drop seeds, they teach you things, and as you grow older, more sophisticated, you start seeing all the patterns of what the depth of what they were talking about, and how profound it was. But when I'm in elementary school, my classmates, and when he says like, hey, there are going to be people out here that tell you anything classical is associated with Europe and white America. And
Mm-hmm.
as soon as they say classic literature, classic music, classic art, feel comfortable asking them what part of Africa are they referring to? What
Mm-hmm.
part of Harlem are they referring to? What part of the Deep South are they referring to? Right. And so then to see, and to hear this, and the story that you've shared is, times, 50,000, right? Number of schools probably is more than that, but, in the country, that's what they're experiencing. Like, no, this is the classic. This is undebatable, undeniable, and you're all going to accept it. But the fact that you can't even say like, oh, mice and men, Dust Bowl, depression. What were other people experiencing during that time? I have no problem with mice and men. I actually like the book. And what else was going on? Like, how do you supplement that to give this perspective? Because I remember when I was an eighth grade literature and social studies teacher, we read Animal Farm. You know, and we also read other things, but we were also talking about whose voices, perspective, and experiences are being centered and whose are missing, right? Even if they just left with
I
that type of
disagree with
critical
you on
thought.
this too, because the way I feel about it is I believe that like giving your children a full white classical Western education is like smoking for people who aren't white. For white people, it's like a vitamin. It's like something that reasserts and supports in
But it's
them.
more like a steroid, right? Because it makes them feel good, but it's actually bad for them too, if that's all they get.
It's good for them, actually. It helps them lead the world. It helps them run everything. It helps them assert their supremacy and never have to deal with their deficiencies. It creates for them a sense that of first place. It
Yeah,
creates for
that's the
them,
steroid.
yeah, it's a steroid for them.
Mhm.
So the idea that you would change any of that, I can see why they fight it. I can
Mhm.
see why they fight removing any of that from their diet, because in their kids' lives, it's a great diet for white supremacy,
Oh,
and
absolutely.
and they don't want anything other than white supremacy because they've had it go on so long now that they fear that if they weren't fully in control. I mean, listen, this is the white reality. If you're not fully in control anymore, you have to worry about there's going to be some retribution for things that you've done for all this time. So the idea that you would no longer have a white government or a white police kind of agency or a white kind of banking system or whatnot, the fear really is we can't at this point, even if we wanted to, switch to a multicultural power sharing relationship because we fear retribution.
Mhm.
Like the idea, white supremacy means never having to say sorry for having ultimate power of everything, the last word on everything, the last word on law, the last word on what the rules will be, the last word on what will be read and what won't be read, the last word on what the national story will be and won't be, the last word on what wars we will go into and you will die in and what wars you won't go into, the last word on whether or not we think it's wrong or right that somebody puts a knee on your neck and kills you in front of everybody in front of cameras, right? Like the having the last word on everything is something you don't want to give up. So of course you want to raise your kid steeped in a steady tea of white supremacy that gives them a story for why you're number one. Like you're
Mhm.
number one because you wrote the most compelling documents of government ever that
Ever,
weren't influenced
ever.
by anybody else anywhere else on the world, and there
Mhm.
wasn't anything like it anywhere else. And you were exceptional because of what your people did. And of course, every one of you was related to Thomas Jefferson. None of you are related to like the people with no teeth that were like walking barefoot down the road and like he had as indentured servitude. No, you're just like Thomas Jefferson. That's your blah blah. So a steady diet of that for them is a steroid and a vitamin. For our kids, it's like smoking. It's like vaping, right? So we can let our kids vape that. So when we say, okay, yeah, but I do like some of the books, and I still want some of the books in my kids' diet that reasserts the a classic is of Mice and Men. A classic is Dickens. A classic is, and then we're going to include some of you people in. That's
Mhm.
like secondhand smoke now. That's not as bad as smoking because you're still getting some of our vitamin.
Mhm.
See, like the kid for a Chicano kid, like we should ask, what's a steroid intellectual diet for a Chicano kid
Mhm.
or for an Ojibwe kid, right? If your kid is Ojibwe, what would be the equivalent of the white supremacist diet that they're having, right? But for Ojibwe kids, right? A kid who moves to America from Ghana, what's going to be their steroid
Mhm.
intellectual diet or whatnot? And I can guarantee you that it's probably okay to read some other people's stuff. Like the kid from Ghana can read some stuff about the kid who's Ojibwe, who could read some stuff about the Chicano kids, right? Who can read some kids about, can read about Langston Hughes. But all of those things that I just said are really a world diet that is in conflict with just one group, the white supremacist diet. So I don't mind if my kid reads about the indigenous people of Mexico and the kid who moves from Ghana and other ethnic peoples of the world. But I am a little bit kind of annoyed with the idea that we always have this partial default, right? Like we do still give our kids, and this is the difference between what I've seen for teachers of color in schools of color, is the diet is different in some of those schools, especially the ones that are seriously separated from the majority system.
Mm-hmm.
You walk in, and those kids to me are more culturally and ethnically intelligent because the diet is different. The intellectual diet in those classrooms is just different. And it's
Very
not what
different.
my kids are experiencing.
Mm-hmm.
It's as a parent, it's what I know is possible. But in our traditional district schools, now I can see the distance, the struggle it would be to even get close to that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now we have one principal of color amongst our kids' 3 schools. I don't know that we have any Black teachers
Mm.
in any of the kids' lives right now. I don't think there has been one. And we're talking, high school age, elementary age, and middle school age.
In middle school. Yeah.
And I'm probably more militant and animated about this because they are really getting the smoking diet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like where you are in Philly, I imagine they're getting even better, like way better in the diet, even in the schools where there's lots of white teachers and it's a district school or whatnot, just because there's more people of color, period, in Philly or whatnot. So
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that's true, but I imagine that you all even have a better.
I mean, but it's still a struggle, right? Like it's the in Dr. Carr and others who've and Dana King, who did so much writing curriculum. They'll tell you stories about, like, we wrote a curriculum, we pointed out, like, here are the lessons, and then we went and observed teachers teaching the lessons. And some just like, oh yeah, that's not important, that's not important, that's not important. And typically they would be white teachers,
Wow.
removing the deep connections that were supposed to be made and just teaching it, right? Like, it's like reading Watson's Go to Birmingham and seeing teachers talk about the mother who's really plotting a course, and she's plotting a course for safety, right? So the family can be safe because of everything that was happening in America. And they're just like, yeah, she's very organized. See, like, just like totally missing, or a teacher teaching Chinua Achebe Things Fall Apart, and never even dawning on them, like, this is about colonialism. Like, but no, this is just like, oh yeah, this is only about this one random Black man about anger and fear and how that destroys his life. Like, I think you're missing a big part of this conversation, right? And so, yes, and everything you said about the diet and what people are fed on and what they have about themselves and their positive racial identity, or what have they ingested, and how does it manifest itself when they have self-hatred, right? And so when Malcolm used to talk about who taught you to hate yourself, plenty of kids could say my school, my teacher, my principal, my curriculum. That's what taught me to hate myself. And so it is absolutely critical that, outside of that, one, we tell our youth, flood the system, protect the kids, be vanguards.
Mm-hmm.
But also, we don't say, we also like lead classrooms, lead schools, build schools, right? Build out of school time, like all of that, and hopefully, if we do it right, then we can move away from just having detox centers for our kids in out of school time and actually have full, right, enrichment, exploration, just genius time for the students to tap into what it was, instead of constantly having to, detox from all the, the poison that they're being given in the name of classical curriculum or good curriculum. No, it's crap. Like, you're feeding them dog crap. And you brought up another good point. Their children, right? Because when we talk about this windows and mirrors, a lot of times people focus on, yeah, Black kids need more mirrors and not so many windows. I'm like, yeah, that's true.
Mm-hmm.
But what feeds white supremacy more than a white kid going 13 years? And even if I got a Black friend, but in their unconscious mind or in their conscious mind, but they're always thinking like, but his people haven't done really anything. Like, his people have never contributed. They don't have a classical anything. They are stowaways, right? How do you have a friendship, like that? No, it's constantly going to be like, well, yeah, we're cool, but I'm actually superior than you, right? And it'll manifest itself in so many different ways. But they've been fed that 13 years. That was their diet for 13 years. And then the other one,
Oh, that was their diet for 400
yeah,
years.
that's right.
Well,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
several
Because
centuries.
again, it's not just the institutions, right? They're also taught this at their dining room tables and their car rides home, in the media every time they turn it on. And the same thing with black kids. They're also taught like, oh, they're giving anti-black messages on the
Mhm.
media, in society, in curriculum by Robert and his ilk, in their writing, in their teaching. Yeah, it's a, I mean, it's a war on black children that's never really ended, but we like to pretend
I
that
think
it's
it's a
soft.
war on it's a war on indigenous people. It's
Oh
a
yeah,
war
people
on
of color.
colonized people and
Hmm.
people of color. So when I think about that Chicano kid, and I think about that, here in Minnesota, the Ojibwe kid, and I start living in their stories, their histories, and start seeing like their pathways or whatnot, I start seeing this universal thing that transcends any one of their particular stories, but there's connections, right?
Oh,
The
100%.
African and American, the African in America story and the Chicano story and the Dakota Sioux or the Ojibwe or whoever you want to name story. And you keep going down the list, the Hmong story or whatnot. They the Filipino story, like there's parallels
Oh,
that
oh, 100%.
yeah. And the last thing that anybody would want you to do if your vitamin is white supremacy in your intellectual diet is to unite all of those stories into a common curricula that helps all the oppressed and colonized people of the world understand that it's to their intellectual benefit just to put their kids on a different diet.
Mhm.
And that's why we're having laws passed. These are intellectual diet laws. Thou shalt not teach X.
Mhm.
Thou shalt not
Right
teach
to the state house.
that right to the state house into law, into rules that became people getting fired for teaching the wrong thing or saying the wrong thing in a classroom. That's
Mhm.
power. That's
Oh
real.
yeah.
That's like
Oh
thought
yeah.
power. It's like that you won't even think about
You won't
talking
even think about that.
white supremacy, right?
And just
Let's
imagine the person who wants to try, but they're just like, it's already hard enough to teach and like, all right, how do I teach this? How do I answer
yeah.
questions? And the thing about when some kid asks a question, as
Hmm.
they should, and the teacher just freezes, like, oh crap, am
Hmm.
I gonna be fired if I even engage? Right? Like, let me shut this kid down. So then we're talking about, and at the same time, they were like, yeah, student voice, like students should express, like it's crazy right now. It is, and it's always been crazy. I'm saying crazy right now, but you look at it,
It is getting crazier.
Brownsville, that
Yeah.
was crazy,
Yeah.
right? Now it's crazy. So we got to prepare the students for the wars that are sure to come. Um,
So, in talking about your work, the Center for Black Educator Development, you guys have multiple different things that you do, and I think it's important for people to hear. Like they see your hashtag, I'm sure they
mhm.
generally know what you're trying to do. They've heard you speak before, but you guys run multiple programs and more than one campaign. So, let's start with some of the basic programs that you
Yeah.
run. Like, how's that work?
All right.
Let's
So
tell
yeah,
us how that work.
yeah. So let me say this. So the Center for Black Educator Development, our number one goal is rebuilding a national Black teacher pipeline, a national Black teacher pipeline that's highly effective, that's sustainable, and it's predictable. Right. So that's our work, rebuilding this national Black teacher pipeline. And we look at that pipeline having, earlier we talked about the leaky pipeline. We look at it as three pillars that are underneath that are holding this pipeline up. One is around policy and advocacy. How do we support policies? How do we advocate? How do we agitate for the policies that are going to support a Black teacher pipeline? Right. And so those could be multiple types of things, right? It could be fair funding, right? It can be, apprenticeships. It could be scholarships and loan forgiveness. It could be all those things are policies that support a Black teacher pipeline. Right.
Hmm.
Then there
Hmm.
can be the second pillar. We call them the three P's. The second pillar is around professional learning. What does professional development look like? What is good, teacher preparation, principal preparation, superintendent preparation, school board preparation? What is all the professional learning that should happen? How do you support an educator's mindset, skill, and will level necessary to support a Black teacher pipeline? And that, of course, is Black teachers, but it's also those white colleagues or any other person that's in front of children that can hinder and undermine, because we talked earlier, if a Black child has negative experiences and constantly experiencing racial aggression, they're not going to even think about returning to that class, or they're less likely to think about returning to a school, because that is such a source of pain. That Black educator who comes into the pipeline, if their colleagues are constantly racist and they call HR, and HR is like, oh, you're just being sensitive, or if the recruiter doesn't hear the Black teacher kind of uptick when they're having a conversation, they don't use the right buzzwords that are germane to that white recruiter, they're not going to enter the pipeline. So the professional learning, the mindset issues are absolutely important. How do you build community and have the mindset around that, instead of, oh, I'm going to manage the classroom in a way that, I'm the dictator, right? So all of that are mindset, skill, and will stuff. So that's professional learning. So we got the policy, we have professional learning, all the things, whether it's student teachers, new teachers, veteran educators, principals, blah, 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 blah. And then the third one is the pathway. That's where we spend the vast majority of our time, right? That's the pathway that supports this pipeline. Are really three main parts, maybe four. One is Freedom Schools Literacy Academy, a paid apprenticeship for high school and college students to teach early exposure clinical experiences after school and in the summer. You see it right now. We are like hiring Black youth in high school and college who are interested in being paid teacher apprentices in our Freedom School Literacy Academy, FSLA, right? And people can go on the website if they know, and we're running out of slots. So I will say that. So Freedom School Literacy Academy, summertime, after school, it's apprenticeship, right? Like they are being paid to learn how to teach, to learn how to lesson plan, to learn how to serve as a servant leader, to learn how to teach and the fundamentals of literacy. Science of reading, Robert. This is what these high school students are doing. The woke crowd. That's what actually what we've always been about. And then another part of that is a curriculum. So we actually have a curriculum that the team has written as an elective. So in the cities that we partner with, we have high school students who are taking, they're like, oh yeah, it's like a teacher academy. And so they take course, an elective about teaching 101, so to speak, but it's from a Black pedagogical framework and a Black historical lens. Because we know if they are interested in teaching, they go to Ed Prep, they're going to learn about white educational theorists, white behavior theorists. They're going to learn about John Dewey, Piaget, B.F. Skinner, Horace Mann, Freud, right? Like they're going to learn about them, but they don't learn about Dr. Amos. They don't learn about Lucy Craft Laney. They don't learn, what did Carter G. Woodson say about preparing teachers and principals, right? What did Mary McLeod Bethune say about the relationship between teaching and learning in our communities, right? And so it's an elective, right? So imagine instead of taking, Greek mythology 101, they're taking Black teaching traditions 101.
You're saying something else right now that I never really keyed in on. I'm glad you just said that, because this extending my smoking analogy versus vitamin. In white world, some of these things that you will be taught and how you will be educated are a vitamin and a steroid for you, but are smoking for someone else, meaning they are good for you and your concept of the world, but they're bad for other people. You just said they're going to learn Piaget and Dewey and Skinner. Do we ever stop for a moment and just think about that statement, what you just said, as a statement? Especially if we're using the vitamin versus smoking analogy. Even the Black and Chicano and Ojibwe and Hmong teacher that go through the teacher prep process are going to be steeped in the tea of white supremacy, even when it sounds like the good white supremacy. Because who could be against Dewey? I mean, Dewey's like amazing in some ways, I guess. I mean, he was a homeschool student. I mean, a homeschool parent who wanted to put everybody else's kids, I guess, in I don't know. So I've heard. And he had a few.
People should read about what B.F. Skinner thought about Black people, and then now they're using that to train people to teach Black. I mean, it's insane. I mean, it's actually when you actually look at this. Yeah, I mean, it's absolutely insane. People, they're using theories and philosophies of folks who never saw Black people, as full human beings, let alone agents of their own lives, and actually attending some of these schools, right? Like, so it's so steeped in those type of, those type of things. It's like having Robert theory and using that to train teachers to teach.
this adds another layer of complexity, maybe for a different discussion. But like when we
Mhm.
talk about teacher prep programs, like how important HBCUs are,
Yeah, that's what I was about to
you
say.
know,
If you don't,
as
yeah.
laboratories for a new school of teaching. Now, let me just stop as I say this. HBCUs can be on some respectability politics and as aligned
Mhm.
sometimes with the educator industrial complex when it comes to these type of things as anybody else. But all I'm saying is they also offer an opportunity for some of them not to be that and to be laboratories for how we rethink things like what you said. Well, the average person is going to learn Skinner and Dewey and Piaget and probably about Horace Mann, I'm sure at some point. They're probably going to learn very little about the Prussian model of education that became our model of education, which was really meant to create good little soldiers who don't question the state very much. They're probably not going to learn very much about that. But my thinking is, why would we train our trainers? Right? These are the trainers. Why would we train our trainers with poison, with a reification of the white supremacist ideal? And just because it's left wing white supremacy, like I'm sure that's what people listening to this would be confused by. Well, Chris, I mean, white supremacy is kind of like right wing stuff. Dewey is not. No, no,
Yeah.
no, 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 no. You're unaware of your left wing white supremacy,
Hmm.
right?
Oh yeah. Oh
You're
yeah.
completely unaware that you are part of left wing white supremacy because you've been trained to believe that there's no such thing.
Hmm. 100%. Yeah. I mean, and so just imagine like, and so that's like, all of this was in our thing as we were creating the center. So the team was just like, how do we develop teachers? How do we support policies? And then how do we create pathways of folks with, clear mindsets about what does it mean to serve communities? What's
Mhm.
the relationship between teaching and learning? And what was actually on the continent? What were consistent that may have been strained during the Middle Passage and Reconstruction and Jim Crow and blah blah blah. What it was strained but not broken. And as Dr. Lassane talks about this Black teaching tradition of how we teach other people children, or the connection between liberation and literacy. All these things are like what we tried to develop, and I think the team just did a really fabulous job on this 3-year sequence. Right.
Mhm.
And the goal eventually is for students to leave high school with an associate's degree as well as their diploma.
Yeah, wow.
Right. And so then already, and then the other big part of that, so we got, those are, three of the pillars to cover the pipeline, but then the pathway, again, FSLA, Freedom School Literacy Academy,
Mhm.
the teacher academy, that which is during the day, right? You can take a elective for 3 years. Last two really being dual enrollment with a college, so you're getting credit. But then there's the Black Teacher Trust Fund, which
Mhm.
is a big part. We don't talk about that a lot. We're going to start like really amplifying that. But this idea of a Black Teacher Trust Fund, so that students who say, you know what, I am going to teach, I'm going to teach it for 5 years, that we do a full blown investment in them so that they go to school. One, they already have some credits, right? So it's already a little bit cheaper. They'll get up to $20,000 in scholarships. So if they
Mhm.
come through our program, they say, "Yep, I want to teach," because it's that's a big commitment for an 18-year-old. Some already know. Some have said like, "Hey, you know what? Because of this exposure that I've had in freedom schools and the teacher academy, now I actually want to teach. I want to lead a classroom." So
Mhm.
we're going to offer a fellowship. We're in partnership with United Negro College Fund.
Wow.
Shout out to UNCF. And so
Wow.
this the Black Teacher Pipeline Fellowship that they can apply to, where they get $20,000 in scholarships, and then some type of stipend once they start teaching at the end of each year for maybe the first 4 years. We're still trying to play out what the numbers, what's sustainable, what can we have, and how much money we'll have in the Black Teacher Trust Fund that will fuel and fund the Black Teacher Pipeline Fellowship. So we got this trust fund that we're working on building up, which is hard. It's like a capital campaign that's
Mhm.
enduring, right? So we're not.
Mhm.
It's not a building. We're trying to build this Black Teacher Trust Fund, because the main thing is this fellowship, and it's not just the scholarship. It's like staying in connection, staying in community, continuing to work in freedom schools, supporting this intergenerational motto: "Lift as you climb." But you have a fellowship. You have this support, and you have UNCF as a partner to create that type of space. It's been really exciting to blend that out. So That's our kind of vision of what a Black teacher pipeline. Yeah, it's a lot, man.
That's
It's a lot.
comprehensive. And I
Yeah.
like that. I like listening to you frame it out so that people listen, and when they hear, they understand that there's a lot of work that you're doing behind the work. So the idea that we need to build the Black teacher pipeline is a more aspirational, large statement to make, but how you do it, especially you talked about earlier, all these leaky pipelines, like leaky parts of the pipeline where, potential Black educators might fall out of the system, out of the pipeline.
Right.
What you just said are many ways in which I love. Number one, working with high school students are getting earlier and earlier to people, waiting until college is too late.
Yep.
Um,
Early exposure.
Early exposure. I love the idea that you guys are concentrating on what they learn.
Yep.
And the different ways that they can learn it.
Yeah, we're not willy-nilly about, just teaching, just come teach
Yeah.
it. We're like, oh, no. There's a Black teaching tradition. There's a Black pedagogical framework that's been honed and tried and researched and effective. And you go and look at how look at all the schools that were built by Black people. Look at the HBCUs that were flooded. Look at the teachers in this country and what they, what their qualifications were, what they were able to do, and how many people that we call giants can trace their time back to a Black teacher during those times. And then it, Brown versus Board came about, other policies came about that scuttled so much of the work. But then even during that time, you can see, look at that independent Black school. Oh, look at that that Black principle, right? Like this tradition and this culture. We're holding on to that, and we're exposing high school students that may not have been exposed to it, right? Like where would they learn about Black teaching tradition in it? Like, and Chris, it's been, and you're absolutely right, it's like a monumental task. But even like yesterday, for a woman to Dr. Hassan had wrote me and said, hey, you know what, like my daughter participated in Camden as a servant leader apprentice. And it changed her trajectory, right? Because they're not just in there taking courses, they're teaching first, second, and third graders. And if you see as a young person seeing like, wow, I helped that first grader move from point A to point B. Like, what does that do for your confidence, your self-efficacy, your vision of yourself as that leader in your community, right? That leader within the school, but also outside of the school. I mean, we get that so much. We hear so many parents that tell us like, my third grader, like, you know what, that was my kid's first Black teacher. That may be their only one. And we're like, well, the teacher was actually a high school apprentice. They're like, yeah, we don't care, because for a third grader, that 11th grader, you might as well be like the coolest, amazing thing in the world, right? Because they're like, oh, that's my, they look at that 11th grader as their teacher. They don't look at like, you're just in high school. Like that third grader is like, oh yeah, like, no, this is amazing, right? But the 11th grader is also like, wow, this is amazing, right? And so then they're being coached by us. But an intergenerational model that's consistent with our culture and values, So it's, my daughters are in it, and they just are hype about freedom schools. They're like, why isn't last year Mama Toya and them were putting so much pressure, like this needs to be a full-time school. Like, Mama Toya, I can't do that right now. Like, first we gotta it's already like so it's just hard work, right? And that's why we need top talent.
Work, but this is what I'm gonna do with Mama Toya, in that like we don't care about how hard you
listen, freedom school tradition is the reward for good work is more work, right? And that's what she said. The reward for good work is more work. So I get it. I totally get it.
This is where we do care. We do care what you guys think and how hard you work. But what I think is embedded in that statement is the experience that I'm having in that short amount of time that isn't a full-time, schooling situation. I want that to be the experience, the personal experience,
not a one-off.
Not a one-off. And the reason is because of what I said earlier. Another group of people's kids are being steeped in daily affirmation and reaffirmation of their total worth. Their intellectual diet that they are having is a supreme diet, a diet of supremacy. And what we are saying is the counterbalance to that is a counter-institutional experience, a counter-institution that presents a counter-institutional experience. So that freedom school experience is like being steeped in the opposite. It's like we're not no secondhand smoke of white supremacy, no vaping for our kids of white supremacy. This is 100% like organic.
Yeah,
This
organic and
is
healthy,
organic.
mentally, culturally, spiritually,
Spiritually,
intellectually. It is healthy,
yeah.
right? It is. This is and it's just been so well received. Like it's been fat, and the thing about it, with the pandemic, we initially were going to pause. But then we got feedback from the community that's saying like, no, dude, try it virtual. And initially, I didn't want to do virtual Freedom School because I was like, I'm hearing all the reports. My own kid, they don't like the online learning, blah blah blah. Listen, it was so fantastic that we kept it as part of our model. So now we're in person in Philly, Camden, and Detroit. Detroit is our newest city. We'll be there. We're starting work in Detroit. But then we kept the virtual version. And last year, Chris, we had 99 Black teacher apprentices across 16 states, which was
Wow.
just so exciting just to see like so many, families, high school, college students who are interested. Right now for virtual for our college students, so we call them servant leader apprentices, these college students, we have a waiting list right now. And we're like full, which is just a great problem to have. And I just wish like we could, anybody who wanted to participate that we could we could accommodate. So we're like really charging hard to plot out, okay, we want to be in 10 cities over the next decade. And then lastly, you mentioned the campaign. So we have this, and it really came from the high school students. And again, inviting them into solving the problem of here's the problem, here's the data, here's the impact, what's your experience? And they came up with a campaign initially, and I had to check myself, or they checked my chin. Then I checked myself. But when they were supposed to come up with this like a campaign, I just swore it was going to be gimmicky. I swore it was going to be like skits and smoke and all this kind of stuff. They came up with hashtag we need Black teachers. And I was like, why so straightforward? Why? They're like, because they're like
on the nose.
Yeah. They're just like, don't, we don't want this to be gimmicky. We want this to be straightforward. We want people to understand the data. We want them to understand the impact. And we want them to understand that we don't have this right now and we want it and we need it. So they came up with the we need Black teachers hashtag. We just have helped amplify it. You and your organization have helped amplify it, and so many others have piled on. But this is from the mouth of babes. This is a high school student said, this is what we want. This is the campaign that we want to share with the world. And they didn't want it to be just on a day. They're like, no, we want this to just be an ongoing conversation. Hashtag we need Black teachers. And so we just keep building on it. So on June 1st, as a matter of fact, what we're inviting the community to do, if you know a graduate, we're in celebration of graduation. If you know a graduate, high school or college, and they are thinking about teaching or they're becoming a teacher, we want to celebrate them on June 1st. So if you know anybody, if you have seniors, high school or college, they're going to college and they want to major in education, or they're graduating from college and they're going into teaching, we want to celebrate them. We want to shout them out as many as we can. And we invite everybody else to as well. And it's hashtag, we're continuing, we need Black teachers, but also adding hashtag future Black teacher in the mix on June 1st as part of the celebration of graduates of, who are thinking about leading classrooms.
We should also say that there is a website for the campaign. There is it?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, we need blackteachers.org. We need blackteachers.org is like the youth facing website that's named after the campaign slogan, mindset, and mission that they came up with. And then obviously our regular website with job postings and research and other things is
what's that site?
www.thecenterblacked.org.
So we want everybody to go out. First of all, this is phenomenal work that is needed if our goal is to rebuild Black educational capital, Black intellectual self-sufficiency, Black intellectual self-defense. This is great work. This is practical work that makes that happen. We could talk about those things in the abstract. Let's stop doing that. Let's stop being abstract about these things. What are the building blocks? What are the Lego pieces that when you put them together, they get us there? So when it comes to the Black Educator Pipeline, which is absolutely critical and key to all those things I just said, to Black educational capital, Black intellectual self-defense, all of those things require
self-defense.
Real work.
I love that.
Yeah, they all require real work, right? So, so this is the real work. Let's build the pipeline. Let's fill in the gaps. Let's get young people excited. Let's create intergenerational Lego pieces that, like, the interlocking pieces that make this work. It doesn't, start in college. It starts earlier than that. And then those of us that aren't doing the work, this is the thing I always push people towards, which is action. If you are not doing this work, which I am not, I see my work in life as being communications and activist and support,
which is
I'm
huge.
Support worker. Yeah, I'm like a support worker. So my role in this is to, one, support in this way. So for all of you coming and visiting and watching, go to Twitter and look for the hashtag We Need Black Teachers and actually support it by spreading it. Go to the website and actually support by learning about what it is, what the work is. I see Michelle Newell is in the comments, and she says,
I know she got some graduates.
She said, our school is starting Freedom Schools this coming year. We will have Freedom School after school each day. And then during the summer, we start our training this summer. I am very excited. This is another way to support the movement of the work, which is to do your own piece of it. If you have something, if you're a school leader or you're a parent in a community or whatnot, you don't have to wait for someone else to do it. And then let's all lock together. Another way you can support is financially. I like to push the idea that we are all philanthropists. If you can afford that latte, my peoples. If you can afford that subscription to a streaming service that is filling your head with nonsense, whatever, you got a couple of dollars for things that matter, like Black teachers, the fund.
The Black Teacher Trust Fund. Listen, we got former students who donate $5 a month. And it because it still comes to my email. Yeah. And, and it's like you see their name and it's like $5 a month. And they've been like since 2019 when we launched, which is crazy, right? And I remember when they first sent it like a check or something. I'm just like, you don't have to do, you just graduated, like you take care of yourself. And they're like, no, like this is part of what, like, listen, it's
Black schools used to be built with quarters and nickels. Be built with nickels. Teachers used to be funded with nickels, dimes, and quarters, right?
And pennies, right? And the pennies. I have one penny, and this is for the education of Black children.
Yes. So make it happen, my people who are watching this right now. I personally commit to, I will contribute to the fund. I will contribute by spreading the word and any communication support services that I can continue to, because that's just my role. That's what I do. While other people are doing the hard work of making this happen. And I can say to you, I don't care about your hard work because I'll support you, but we need to get our kids out of the pipeline where the intellectual smoking chambers, where they are collecting secondhand smoke. Someone else's vitamin is their secondhand smoke. And that's what a lot of these schools are. That's what a lot of these classrooms are. That's what the pondiciofication of education will do to your children, which is, we'll teach you how to read, we'll teach you how to blah, 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 and we'll also teach you how to be a second-class citizen. And we'll teach you how to be a good slave, a good little intellectual slave, because we taught you what we think is the best of all that's ever been said and written and blah, 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 whatever. No.
And you weren't included. You didn't see yourself in there, and don't see yourself outside, I don't
see color. I don't see color. I'm colorblind. This is what I'm going to say as we wrap up, too, about this colorblind nonsense. You should go on the internet. Anyone who believes in this colorblind stuff, I just have an analogy, an analogous thing and I'll give you an example of something you could do as a small experience that you can have that tells you how silly that actually is. There are people that are literally colorblind, meaning they literally can't see colors the way that we see colors. And they make these sunglasses or these glasses that help them actually see the colors that they've been missing their whole lives.
Oh, wow.
And if you go online, you can look for them, you can find them. And there's videos of people getting them for the first time. They're not cheap glasses, by the way. They're expensive. So when people get them, they're like, oh, my God, I can't believe you got me this, whatever. They put the glasses on, and it takes a couple of seconds for their eyes to adjust. But once they do, they start crying most of the time. And they can't believe that this is what we've been seeing the whole time and they haven't been seeing, because they're colorblind. So they can't see real reds and real blues and real greens. So looking at a field of flowers or grass or whatever suddenly has a totally different look to them that literally moves them to tears because they realize what they haven't been seeing their whole life. And there are countless, if you go to YouTube, you can see countless videos of this happening, like people getting these as gifts and putting them on and seeing colors for the first time and not being able to believe what it really looks like in the world.
Wow.
That is the difference between, like, when people tell you I'm colorblind and colorblindness is the way to go, they need those glasses. They need those glasses that show them the full range of color that the world has to offer, or else they want to be visually ignorant for the rest of their lives. I just think that's so analogous to what we talk about. This is why we need Black teachers. We also need Chicano teachers,
indigenous teachers,
whatever. We need countercultural learning experiences. We need counter institutions, counter curriculum that retrains our kids. We need re-education for our kids because they're being miseducated by a system that is intent on making them good little colonial abject soldiers. And we can't have that. Anyways, brother, thank you so much for your work.
No, my pleasure. My pleasure. And I just want to just say this one last thing too. Since 2019, Chris, we have 25 Black educators who've come through our program. They've come through our Freedom School Literacy Academy. They were paid teacher apprentices, and now they're in schools working as teachers, or teacher residents, or teachers of record. That 25, it sounds like a small number. That's more Black teachers than a lot of teacher colleges have cranked out.
Wow. We're going to have,
and we're just getting started. Yeah.
Getting the list from you of these people so we can send them care packages.
Oh, that would be amazing.
We're going to need to get this list from you because I'm a care package person. I like to send people. So we need to send them something. Sharif El Mekki, once again, appreciate you, brother, for the work that you're doing, the real work that you're doing.
No, man. Thank you for your platform amplification, your support, advocacy, and the cover fire that you often are called on to provide. Which is
my role.
Yeah, which is in itself, but it's also like a sacrifice and a commitment that doesn't always keep you out of harm's way. And I always quote my friend Amir Suleiman. He says some people, we need people that take off the iron vest and run into the thick of the mess. And when I hear that, that song from him, that poem from him, I often think about you. That it would be easier to be in a safe space, but you take off that iron vest and you run into the thick of the mess because you're concerned about the 8 million Black children, but also all children, right? And like, what does educational and racial justice actually look like when it can be materialized and when it can be forged? Because we know it ain't going to happen on its own. So I appreciate you.
And I will say, as we close out here, I appreciate everyone who comes to listen and to learn and to offer to share things in the comments.
Yeah, to make community that you've built here is dope.
Develop fellowship. We appreciate you. It's a family for the revolution, and that's what we have here. And I would be remiss if I didn't say that Sharif and I don't do all the work. The Center for Black Educator Development has an amazing staff of people who, if we took 10 minutes, we could go through them one by one, and their stories are incredible. Like, they're just like one by one. One is more impressive than the next type of thing. You have a full staff of great people. And my staff at Brightbeam is an amazing staff of people, very diverse in their backgrounds, their thinking, their skills, their talents. And they bring that every day, all day to the job in a way that makes me feel very blessed.
It's not like it, right? It's not like having a team that you're in lockstep with. And like, I mean, it moves mountains, literally.
I appreciate like the blessing of being able to lead an organization where I feel that way. And then to work with organizations like yours, where again, you do great work, Sharif, but your staff is amazing. So
listen,
they lift them up and show them to the world.
100%, 100%. Like this couldn't even be a vision without having a team like this, because it's so many facets of it, so much work to pour into, and you need deep intellectual, rigorous thought and action, and that's what they bring to the table. So I just feel blessed to be in a space, in a place like this with these just fierce advocates, man. Like advocates
Let's
and
keep pushing.
workers and agitators and educators.
This has been another episode of Freedom Friday, and you are still not free, but hopefully you are freer after this hour with us than you were when we started. We will see you again next week for another episode of Freedom Friday and another riveting topic that helps us move Black educational capital further down the line and actually builds up the Black intellectual self-defense that we need for all of our people.